He was just a dad having lunch with his little girl, until one word turned the entire diner silent. The diner door chimed as someone walked in, but no one looked up. It was the kind of Saturday afternoon when time seemed to stretch. The smell of bacon and syrup hung in the air, plates clattered, and the soft hum of conversation filled the space. At a corner booth by the window sat Darius Monroe, a tall man in his early 40s with calm eyes that had seen too much. Across from him sat his 10-year-old daughter, Amaya, swinging her legs beneath the table, trying to balance a strawberry on her fork before it fell. "Dad, you're cheating," she giggled, seeing him snatch the strawberry mid-air. "That's called training, sweetheart," he said, smiling. "Years of catching things before they hit the floor." "Like what? Pancakes?" she teased, laughing again. He chuckled softly. "Something like that." To anyone watching, they looked like any father and daughter sharing a meal. No one would have guessed that the quiet man pouring syrup over his daughter's pancakes had once led missions that would never appear in history books. He'd spent years in the shadows, silent, invisible, and efficient. But here, with his little girl, he was just dad. Darius leaned back, letting the moment sink in. He'd traded his uniform for oil-stained coveralls, long nights in a Navy mechanic shop, and weekends like this. He didn't miss the adrenaline anymore. He missed the peace. "Hey, Dad," Amaya said, her voice softer now. "Do you ever wish you were still in the Navy?" He paused, looking at her. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but I got everything I need right here." She smiled, proud without really knowing why. She only knew her dad was strong, kind, and never seemed afraid of anything. At that exact moment, the diner door opened again. The bell rang louder this time. A small group of uniformed Navy officers stepped inside, filling the room with a quiet authority that made heads turn. They were laughing, talking, the kind of confident energy that only came from men who'd seen combat and survived it. Darius noticed, but didn't react. Old habits told him to keep his head down, stay unseen. Amaya glanced at them curiously. "They look like your old friends," she whispered. "Maybe," he said simply, keeping his tone light. But one of the officers, an older man with sharp blue eyes and silver hair cut close, spotted him. The man slowed his steps. His laughter faded. His name tag read Whitaker, Admiral Charles Whitaker. He couldn't quite place the face at first, but there was something about the man in that corner booth that pulled at a long-buried memory, the kind of memory that makes your stomach tighten before your mind catches up. But Admiral Whitaker didn't know yet. The man he was staring at wasn't just another veteran. He was someone whose name had once been spoken only in whispers. The waiter came by with refills, orange juice for Amaya, black coffee for Darius. The father gave a polite nod of thanks before turning his attention back to his daughter, who was now busy drawing a lopsided heart on her napkin with a red crayon. "Who's that for?" Darius asked. "You," she said simply, without looking up. "Because you always make my breakfast on weekends." He smiled, quietly touched. "Even when you burn the toast?" "That was one time," she laughed, pretending to be offended. "And you still ate it." "Because it was made with love," he said, reaching across to ruffle her hair. Moments like that were everything to him. After 12 years of service, deployments, silence, and nights where he wasn't sure he'd see home again, Darius had learned that peace didn't come from medals or missions. It came from mornings like this, the sound of his daughter's laughter, the smell of syrup on pancakes, the world finally slowing down enough to let him breathe. "Dad," she asked after a pause, "when you were a SEAL, did you ever get scared?" He took a long sip of his coffee before answering. "Yeah." Every time Amaya blinked, surprised. "Really? Being scared doesn't make you weak, sweetheart," he said. "It makes you careful. The trick is doing what's right, even when you're scared." She nodded slowly, letting that sink in. Darius always had a way of saying things that sounded simple but carried weight. She might not fully understand now, but she would someday. Outside the window, the afternoon sun was beginning to dip. A light breeze rustled the small American flag by the entrance. The group of officers had taken a table a few booths away, their laughter bouncing lightly through the air. Darius noticed how Amaya's attention shifted toward them, the way their uniforms caught the light, the way everyone in the diner seemed to sit a little straighter in their presence. "You miss that, don't you?" she asked softly. He followed her gaze. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but I did my part. Now I get to be here for you. Mom would have liked that," Amaya said quietly. Darius looked at her for a moment, that bittersweet mix of love and pain in his chest, tightening just a little. Yeah, he murmured. She would have. Amaya reached for his hand, and he squeezed it gently. They sat in silence for a moment, a silent promise between them. No matter what life threw at them, they had each other. But peace doesn't last long when the past still remembers your name. From across the diner, Admiral Whitaker's voice carried faintly over the chatter. He was speaking to his men, laughing about something, but his eyes kept drifting toward Darius. There was something nagging at him, something he couldn't quite put a name to. Dad, Amaya said again, snapping him back, can we go to the park after this? Of course, he said, smiling faintly. You bring the soccer ball? It's in the car, she grinned. Good. I'll need to warm up my old knees first. She laughed. You mean your ancient knees? He raised an eyebrow. Watch it, kid. I've carried heavier loads than you, Amaya giggled, and for a moment, everything was light again. But just a few tables away, a different kind of storm was starting to form, one that neither of them could see coming. Because sometimes, your past doesn't knock before it walks right back into the room. The group of officers filled their corner of the diner with the easy confidence of men who'd been through the fire and made it back. Their laughter rose and fell, cutting through the clink of plates and the soft chatter around them. Admiral Charles Whitaker sat at the center of it all, posture straight, his white uniform crisp even in the dim light. He was the kind of man people noticed, not because he demanded it, but because his presence carried weight. Years of service had carved quiet authority into every movement. Still, as the conversation flowed around him, his gaze kept drifting toward the man in the corner booth with the little girl. Something wrong, sir? Asked one of the younger officers, a lieutenant with sandy hair. Whitaker shook his head slightly. No, He paused. That man over there, I swear I know him. The lieutenant followed his eyes. The guy with the kid? Yeah. Maybe he's one of ours, another chimed in. You've probably crossed paths somewhere. Maybe, Whitaker muttered. But deep down, he knew it was more than that. There was a stillness about the man, the kind of stillness that only came from years of training. Controlled breathing, alert, but relaxed, like a lion pretending to nap. At Darius's table, Amaya was finishing her pancakes, cutting them carefully into little squares. Dad, can I get one of those milkshakes? She asked, pointing toward the menu taped near the napkin holder. You already had juice, he said, pretending to think it over. Please? He sighed dramatically. All right, but you're sharing it. Deal. She smiled, triumphant. He motioned to the waiter, ordered one chocolate milkshake with 2 straws, and leaned back again. That's when he noticed them. The group in uniform, the Admiral's eyes flicking in his direction now and then. Darius's instincts kicked in instantly, even if he didn't show it. He noticed the patches, the posture, the way they carried themselves. Navy. SEALs, maybe. His people once, but a lifetime ago. He didn't feel fear. He felt awareness. Observation. The kind that never truly leaves a soldier. Dad? Amaya said, following his gaze. Do you know them? Darius hesitated, then smiled. No, sweetheart. Just some folks from work. Kinda... She accepted that answer easily enough, sipping her water while drawing another heart on her napkin. At the other table, Whitaker couldn't resist anymore. Excuse me a minute, he told his officers. He rose, his movements slow and deliberate, curiosity tugging at him like a thread he couldn't ignore. As he walked toward Darius's booth, a few patrons turned their heads. There was something unusual about the way the two men's paths seemed destined to cross. Darius noticed him coming. His eyes met Whitaker's halfway, calm, steady, unreadable. No recognition in his expression. Or maybe too much for words. Excuse me, the Admiral said politely as he reached the booth. I couldn't help but think I've seen you before. You served, didn't you? Darius gave a small nod. Yes, sir. Long time ago, the Admiral smiled, trying to keep it casual. Navy? Yes, sir. I thought so, Whitaker said, leaning slightly on the booth. What was your call sign? We all had one, right? Amaya looked up, curious. What's a call sign? She asked. It's like a nickname, Whitaker explained with a grin. Every SEAL has one, usually something tough, something earned. He looked back at Darius, expecting a simple answer. Maybe something playful. But the diner's air felt heavier all of a sudden, as if time itself slowed. Darius looked at his daughter, wiped a drop of syrup from her cheek, and said quietly, "Iron Ghost." For a heartbeat, Whitaker didn't react. Then his face froze, the humor draining away. Because that wasn't just any name. That was a name that didn't belong in casual conversation. A name buried deep inside missions no one was supposed to remember. For a moment, Admiral Whitaker just stood there, his lips slightly parted as if his mind was trying to catch up to what his ears had heard. "Iron Ghost?" he repeated slowly, almost in disbelief. Darius didn't answer. He didn't need to. The way he held that calm gaze, still, respectful, but utterly grounded, said it all. Whitaker's smile faltered, replaced by something heavier. The noise in the diner seemed to fade. Forks stopped clinking. Conversations dulled to whispers. The other officers at Whitaker's table had gone quiet too, exchanging uncertain looks. The Admiral cleared his throat, his voice a shade lower now. That's a name I haven't heard in years." Darius gave a small, polite nod. "That's how I like it." Amaya looked between them, confused. "Dad? What's wrong?" "Nothing, sweetheart," Darius said gently. "Just talking." But Whitaker wasn't done. He was searching Darius's face now, the memories unfolding one after another. The old mission reports, the whispered stories about the man who could move through enemy lines without a sound, who never missed, who never left anyone behind. A ghost. He let out a small, almost nervous laugh. "You're telling me you're Iron Ghost?" Darius just gave a faint shrug. "That's what they called me." A long time ago, the Admiral sat down slowly, sliding into the seat across from him without waiting for an invitation. "I'll be damned," he murmured. "I thought that was just a story, a morale thing. We all heard about Iron Ghost back in the day. Nobody ever knew if he was real. Most things are better left that way," Darius said quietly, taking a sip of his coffee. Amaya, wide-eyed, whispered, "Dad, what's Iron Ghost?" Darius smiled faintly at her. "Just a name from the past, baby. Doesn't mean much anymore." Whitaker shook his head, still in disbelief. "Doesn't mean much? You were a myth, Monroe. Half the guys thought command made you up. You'd show up on the most impossible ops, get people out alive, vanish before the dust settled. We used to joke you didn't even breathe the same air as the rest of us." Darius didn't respond. He wasn't one for war stories. The Admiral leaned forward, his tone softening. "Why'd you never take the commendation?" "The record's blank after 14, classified black. You just disappeared." "I had other things to take care of," Darius said, glancing at Amaya. Whitaker followed his eyes and nodded slowly. "Family." "Family," Darius echoed. "You learn what matters after you've seen enough." For a long moment, the two men just sat there, one wrestling with awe, the other with the ghosts of a life he'd left behind. Amaya broke the silence. "Dad, did you save people?" Darius looked at her gently. "I tried to. Sometimes I did. Sometimes I couldn't." Her small hand reached across the table and touched his. "I think that's brave." He smiled softly. "Thank you, baby girl." Whitaker's eyes softened too, his earlier pride replaced by something quieter. Respect. "I didn't mean to interrupt your meal," he said finally. I guess I didn't expect to meet a ghost today." Darius gave a small smile. "No harm done, sir." The Admiral stood, still looking a little shaken. "If half the things I've heard are true, you did more for this country than anyone knows." Darius looked back at him. "Then let's keep it that way. But secrets never stay buried forever, and sometimes respect can stir up truths you thought you'd buried for good." For a few seconds, no one moved. The diner, once full of chatter, had gone strangely still. You could almost hear the faint hum of the ceiling fan turning above them. Whitaker stood there, trying to steady his breath, while Darius calmly folded his napkin beside his empty plate. Amaya didn't fully understand what had just happened, but she could feel the change in the air. Kids always could. Her dad, normally so warm and easygoing, was quieter now. Not tense, just contained. The waiter arrived with their milkshake, smiling until he noticed the look on both men's faces. He placed it gently on the table and slipped away without a word. Whitaker broke the silence first. "You know," he said quietly, There were nights back in Helmand province, so we'd get reports that Iron Ghost had been there. No one ever saw you come or go. Just the aftermath. People alive who shouldn't have been. We used to call it divine intervention. Darius stirred his coffee, not looking up. It wasn't divine. Just training and luck. The Admiral's mouth twitched, a faint, almost tired smile. Humility too, I see. Amaya's brow furrowed. Dad, did you help that man? Darius finally looked at her. A lot of people, honey. That's what we were supposed to do. Whitaker's gaze softened. Supposed to, but not everyone did. The way he said it, low, regretful, made Darius glance up at him for the first time. There was history in that tone, pain too. I lost men, Whitaker continued quietly. Some to bad intel, some to bad luck. But the ones you saved, they never stopped talking about you. Said you didn't speak much, just showed up when things were at their worst. Darius's eyes drifted toward the window. That's the job. You go where it's ugly and hope you make it out. Amaya was still listening, her straw now sitting untouched in the milkshake. Did you ever get hurt? She asked. Once or twice, Darius said lightly, but nothing I couldn't walk away from. Whitaker studied him as if trying to read what wasn't being said. I heard you carried a man 3 miles through enemy lines after your team went dark. That was a long time ago. You didn't get a medal for that. I didn't need one. The Admiral leaned back, silent for a beat. You ever wonder why people like you don't get recognized? Darius gave a faint smile. Because people like me weren't supposed to exist. Whitaker nodded slowly, the weight of that truth sinking in. It wasn't bitterness in Darius's voice, just quiet acceptance. The kind that comes after too many years of watching history erase the names that made it possible. Amaya reached for his hand again. You're my hero, Daddy. He smiled, his expression softening instantly. That's all I ever wanted to be. Whitaker looked down, his throat tightening. It wasn't often he found himself speechless, but something about that small exchange between father and daughter hit harder than any battlefield memory ever could. Monroe, he said finally, voice low, I owe you an apology. For walking up like that, for joking. I didn't realize who I was talking to. Darius shook his head. You don't owe me anything, sir. I'm just a dad now. But deep down, Whitaker knew men like Darius never really stop being who they were. They just find quieter ways to serve. The conversation could have ended there. 2 men with shared history quietly acknowledging each other before going their separate ways. But Whitaker didn't move. Something in him couldn't. It wasn't just recognition anymore. It was guilt. He cleared his throat, trying to steady his voice. You know, I think I read one of your mission reports once. Well, what was left of it. Half of it was redacted. Black lines everywhere. Darius gave a faint smirk. Sounds about right. Whitaker leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice. Operation Lockstep, Northern Afghanistan, winter of 2013. Ring any bells? Darius didn't answer. His jaw flexed once, just once, before he took another sip of coffee. That was all the confirmation Whitaker needed. I was a commander back then, the Admiral continued. We were pinned down. Ambush. Sandstorm came out of nowhere. We thought the whole unit was gone. He paused, his tone softening. But the next morning, there was a trail. 3 miles long, footprints, shell casings, drag marks. You pulled 4 men out of there, didn't you? Darius stayed silent. Amaya's eyes widened. You saved people in a sandstorm? He met her gaze, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Something like that. Whitaker looked between them, almost amazed. You didn't even wait for backup. You went in alone. Darius set his cup down carefully. Sometimes waiting costs lives. You do what you have to do. The Admiral exhaled through his nose, shaking his head slowly. You know, I've met a lot of brave men in my life, but none who walked away from that kind of record. Walking away was the bravest thing I ever did, Darius said. Whitaker tilted his head, studying him. Why? Because when you stay too long in that world, you forget what you're fighting for. His voice dropped slightly, almost like he was speaking to himself. You stop being a person and start being a mission. I didn't want my daughter growing up with a ghost for a father. Amaya looked up at him, trying to understand. But you were a hero. He smiled softly, brushing her hair from her face. A hero's just someone who did what needed to be done. Doesn't mean he's perfect. Whitaker's tone grew thoughtful. I lost my son around that time, he said suddenly, surprising even himself. He was stationed out in Kandahar. I used to tell myself maybe he was saved by one of your kind, someone who never asked for credit. Darius looked at him, quiet for a moment. Maybe he was. The two men sat in silence for a beat, two fathers, both scarred by service in their own ways. Amaya leaned forward on her elbows, her curiosity breaking the heaviness. Dad, when you left the Navy, did people know? Darius smiled gently. No, I just stopped showing up. They moved on, and so did I. Don't you miss it? She asked. Sometimes, he admitted, but I'd miss you more. That made her smile. A pure, innocent kind of smile that seemed to ease the tension around the booth. Even Whitaker felt it, like a small piece of something lost being found again. He nodded slowly. You did the right thing, Monroe. Maybe the rest of us just forgot what that looks like. Darius looked down at his hands. We all serve in different ways, sir. Some on the field, some at home. The Admiral sighed, his voice quieter now. You ever think about coming back? Even in a training role? Men like you, we could use them. I have someone to train already, Darius said, glancing at his daughter. She keeps me plenty busy. Whitaker chuckled softly, shaking his head. She's got your eyes, you know that. She's got her mother's heart, Darius said. That's what matters. Amaya smiled proudly. For a moment, the tension melted away. Two men who'd once lived in the shadows now sat under the pale light of a family diner, talking not as soldiers, but as fathers. But peace is a fragile thing, and for men like them, it never lasts long before the past decides to remind you it's still watching. Whitaker sat quietly now, his elbows resting on the edge of the table, watching the man across from him with a mix of admiration and regret. The other officers had gone silent too, trying not to stare but unable to look away. You could feel it in the air, that rare, unspoken respect that no medal or title could command. After a while, he said softly, You know, Monroe, I used to think leadership was about standing in front of people, giving orders, making decisions that others couldn't. But seeing you here, with your little girl, I realize it's about knowing when to step aside. Darius gave a small nod. Sometimes the hardest thing to do is walk away from what you're good at. Whitaker smiled faintly. Yeah, but maybe it's the only way to stay human. Amaya leaned forward again, sipping her milkshake, her big eyes shifting between the two men. Dad, did you ever meet him before? Darius shook his head. No, sweetheart. But we've walked in the same places. Whitaker looked down at his hands for a moment, then back up. You know, when you spend years commanding men, you start believing you understand sacrifice. But you... He hesitated, then continued. You lived it. Darius tilted his head. We all did. Some of us just made it back. The Admiral chuckled softly, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. You ever wonder if the world will remember the people who really made a difference? No, Darius said simply, because if you do it for recognition, you've already lost sight of why you did it in the first place. Whitaker sat back, letting the words hang there. They weren't dramatic, but they hit hard. The kind of truth that made you rethink everything you'd ever believed about pride and service. You're a better man than most of us, Monroe. Darius gave a faint smile. I'm just a man who learned to listen. Whitaker nodded. Maybe that's what we all need to learn. Amaya looked at both men, then asked, What's going to happen now? Darius smiled. We finish our milkshake, pay the bill, and go to the park. That's what's going to happen, she giggled, content with that answer. Whitaker's expression softened. You know, I think that's the best mission plan I've heard all week. Darius raised an eyebrow slightly. You still plan your days like ops, huh? Old habits die hard, Whitaker replied. But seeing you here, it's a reminder. We forget that peace takes just as much discipline as war. Darius nodded. Yeah, the difference is peace doesn't get the same medals. Whitaker looked down, smiling quietly. Maybe it should. For a few seconds, there was nothing but the sound of Amaya's straw slurping at the bottom of the milkshake glass. Then she looked up and said, "Dad, when I grow up, I'm going to be brave like you." Darius reached across and squeezed her hand. "You already are." Whitaker stood up slowly, straightening his uniform. He hesitated for a moment, then extended his hand. "It's been an honor, Monroe." Really, Darius stood, shook his hand firmly. "Likewise, sir." Whitaker held his gaze a little longer. "If there's ever anything I can do for you, anything, you just call." "I appreciate that," Darius said, his tone sincere but measured. "But I've got everything I need right here." The Admiral looked down at Amaya and smiled. "You've got a good dad, young lady." "I know," she said proudly. He chuckled, nodding before turning to leave. As he walked back to his table, his men looked at him expectantly. He just said quietly, "That man's the reason some of us are still breathing. Show some respect." The younger officers exchanged glances and nodded silently. Darius sat back down, watching Whitaker leave the diner a few minutes later. For once, the man who had been a ghost was seen, not as a legend, not as a soldier, but as something far rarer. A father, a human being. But the weight of being remembered can be as heavy as being forgotten. And Darius knew that the moment you stop running from your past, it finally starts to rest. The check arrived quietly, slipped onto the edge of the table by the same waiter who hadn't dared interrupt since the Admiral left. Darius reached into his pocket, pulled out a folded 20 and a few crumpled bills, and left them neatly beneath the receipt. Amaya finished the last of the milkshake and wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. "You think that man will tell people about you?" she asked. Darius smiled faintly. "Doesn't matter if he does. People believe what they want to believe. But he looked like he was scared and proud," she said, "like he saw a ghost." He chuckled at that, shaking his head. "Maybe he did." They slid out of the booth and Darius helped her with her jacket. As they walked toward the door, the other patrons tried not to stare. Some whispered softly, others just nodded. They didn't know the details, but they knew they'd just witnessed something rare. The quiet recognition of a man who'd carried the weight of war without ever asking for thanks. Outside, the California sun was warm on their faces. The parking lot shimmered under the light. Amaya took his hand, and they walked toward the old Ford truck, parked near the edge of the lot. For a while, they didn't speak. The silence between them wasn't heavy. It was peaceful. Finally, Amaya broke it. "Dad, if you were a hero, why didn't you ever tell me?" Darius smiled softly, opening the truck door for her. "Because real heroes don't need to say it. They just keep doing what's right." She climbed in, thinking about that as he started the engine. "So, you don't miss it? The missions, the people." He looked ahead at the road, the diner shrinking in the rearview mirror. "I miss some of them," he said, "but every man out there is trying to make it home. I made it home. That's enough." Amaya leaned back against the seat, watching the sky outside her window. "Do you think that man will remember you?" Darius thought for a moment. "He doesn't need to remember me, as long as he remembers what matters." At that same moment, inside the diner, Admiral Whitaker stood alone by the counter, waiting to pay. His reflection caught in the chrome napkin holder. For the first time in years, he felt small, humbled in the best way. He looked out the window and saw Darius walking toward his truck, holding his daughter's hand. And it hit him. All his years chasing promotions, medals, and ceremonies. None of it compared to what that man had built in silence. He whispered under his breath, "Iron Ghost." Guess the legends were true after all. The young officer behind him asked, "Sir?" Whitaker smiled faintly. "Just thinking out loud, son. You ever meet someone who reminds you what all this is supposed to mean?" The officer looked confused. "Can't say I have, sir." Whitaker picked up his change. "You will." Outside, Darius's truck rolled out of the lot, the sunlight catching the edges of the windshield. Amaya was talking animatedly about the park, her voice bright and innocent. Darius listened, nodding along, content. He knew the world was full of men chasing recognition, but very few ever found peace. He'd learned the hard way that silence isn't weakness. It's strength that no longer needs to prove itself. As they turned onto the main road, Amaya leaned her head on his shoulder. "I love you, Daddy." "I love you more," he said. She smiled. "I still think Iron Ghost is a cool name, though." He laughed softly. "Let's keep that our secret, all right?" "Deal." The road stretched ahead, long, quiet, and open. Darius drove on, one hand on the wheel, the other resting near his daughters. No more missions, no more orders, just life. Because in the end, the greatest battles aren't fought on foreign soil. They're fought inside ourselves, between pride and peace, noise and silence, fame and family. And the ones who truly win are the ones who choose peace. If you took something from this story, remember this. You don't have to be seen to make a difference. Sometimes, the quietest lives echo the loudest.